had created hell in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. The missiles fired last night at us and our allies were paid for with the funds made available by the last administration.
While the president did not announce any U.S. retaliation for last night's missile strike, just the show of force and the personnel arrayed around him was a clear signal to Iran that if they try anything to harm U.S. interests, they will likely pay dearly for it. Harris?
John Roberts, thank you very much. I want to bring in now Lieutenant General Tom Spoor, a former deputy commander of U.S. forces in Iraq. Great to see you, sir.
You as well.
I want to know how many Americans were in danger and how it is that you missed 2 military bases. Did Iran get lucky or did they miss on purpose?
Yeah, so probably there's about 5,000 people total, U.S. service members in Iraq, and so at each one of those bases, probably no more than 300, 400 U.S. service members total. I don't think this is within Iran's capability to actually try and miss U.S. forces. These missiles that they used are not terribly accurate. They're accurate maybe to within half a mile, and so they are aimed at the bases. There was a good chance of hitting them, but there's also, I don't think it's within their ability to actually deliberately miss U.S. service members as well.
So did they just get lucky?
I think so, at least from our perspective, and I'm not sure what they're thinking this morning, but I think it worked out for the best for both of our countries.
And how does it work that the Iraqis just let that happen? I mean, did they know? Because they had more people, actually, from what you're saying, at those bases than we would.
They had these are their bases. They have many more people at those bases than we did, and this is their sovereign country. And so we hear that Prime Minister Mahdi got a phone call from Iran ahead of time. Maybe that allowed him to warn his forces. I don't know what he did with that information, but you would think that Iraq would be even more mad than we are about missiles hitting their country.
And you've been to both those bases. Tell me what the lay of the land is when you see that that's kind of the close of this particular chapter.
Yeah, and so Al-Assad Air Base, where most of the missiles hit, it's a sprawling airfield kind of thing with maybe 5 miles by 5 miles. It would be very lucky, I think, to hit U.S. troops. But in general, I think what this...
For them.
Yeah, exactly, for Iran to hit our soldiers. I don't know what this means. I think we had some warning. I'm hearing that our forces had warning, allowing them to get in bunkers and things like that. As long as we have that, the danger from missiles is not terribly high.
So let's look at the broader picture now. The president has leaned into the wind of diplomacy. He's saying NATO needs to step in now and do much more than it has. Maybe looking at exiting. When you tell us that number of 5,000 troops, how big of a difference would it be if the president pulled us out?
In the bigger scheme of things, not terribly big, but those 5,000 are making a big difference. They're continuing the fight against ISIS, make sure that ISIS does not raise its presence again in either Iraq or Syria. The forces in Iraq are supporting our forces in Syria, and they also help train the Iraqi security forces.
I have a quick last question for you. It had been reported that we had as many as 60,000 troops in the region. And is that number still accurate?
It depends on which account. And so
okay.
Forces at sea, perhaps, and aircraft carriers, Diego Garcia, sum total, I don't think it would reach 60,000, but it really depends on how big a circle you draw around the region.
That's what the president has in the past pointed to as our capability to react when we left Syria, to react quickly to areas. Lieutenant General Spoor, great to have you on the program. I want to bring you back. Thank you. The administration has faced some challenges and it's...
That's kind of worked out for both of them. But, I don't think much has changed. I mean, President Trump's rhetoric was still pretty harsh when it came to Iran. He's still threatening additional sanctions against the country. I'm not sure what other sanctions you can levy against the country that's really going to hurt the economy any more than it has now. But if we dig a little deeper, it's still kind of troubling. This morning, Ayatollah Khamenei came out and gave a speech, and he said last night's attack was just a slap in the face for the United States, and vengeance is still coming. And the reality of the situation is that Iran really as a huge, massive attack against the United States. They put out a lot of information here this morning about the damage was that seem to be very salient information. They haven't backed it up with any pictures. So people are asking, was this really an eye for an eye? Ayatollah Khamenei lost his right-hand man, the guy that had executed all of his plans in this region, and there were no American casualties in that attack. So it begs the question, are they going to try and save face and do something else, maybe via proxy, or are they going to keep quiet for now and go about their plans in the shadows as they have been before? Because as far as I can see, the status quo remains the same. President Trump is going to put more sanctions on Iran. That's going to draw them even further away from any notion of negotiation with the United States over the nuclear deal, which is basically all but done. Iran has reduced all of its commitments to that deal. They said that they're going to enrich as much uranium as they like, they're going to use as many centrifuges as they like, and they're going to go as far as they need with research and development. So not a lot has changed, and President Trump was also speaking quite badly as far as the Iranian establishment is concerned about Qasem Soleimani, calling him a terrorist whose hands are steeped in blood. So we have averted a direct strike between the two countries, but not much else has changed, and it looks like that maximum pressure campaign is going to carry on.
It is interesting, though, Ayman, that the president seemed to talk. First of all, he talks about that $150 billion, which I just have to keep reminding people it was Iran's money that Iran got back. But he talked about a new Iran deal. He talked about doing that. It's just a weird way of thinking about this, because the other Iran deal, the JCPOA, the 2015 deal, took about 10 years to negotiate. About 2 years of intense negotiation toward the end when America got into it. But anybody in the negotiation world and diplomatic circles will tell you the deal could have been better. Maybe you could have liked it more, but it was really, really, really hard to get to. Donald Trump seems to be thinking, and he has got supporters in this, that by breaking the whole thing and doing all this, he is now in a better position to get a better deal. That hasn't worked, by the way, for North Korea. Is there any indication that it'll work in Iran, that at this point they're going to say, all right, we better sit down and get a better deal?
At this point, the short answer is no. And the reason why I say that is a few things. Everyone who was involved in the first JCPOA, if you want to call it that, made very clear this is not a comprehensive deal between Iran and the United States about all of Iran's nefarious activities. This was
about nuclear enrichment.
It was about nuclear uranium enrichment.
Yeah.
Part of its nuclear program, to contain that, to begin talking about all the other issues. What ended up happening is that when President Trump came in and now shattered that deal, what you've seen is you've opened all the fronts of the crises with Iran. So you now have the nuclear portfolio, if you want to call it that. You still have the terrorism portfolio, with Iran doubling down on many of its proxies in the region that the United States considers a terrorist organization like Hezbollah. And now on top of that, you have this direct military-to-military confrontation, America killing an Iranian general, Iran responding in kind, attacking an American military facility. So what you've done is you've created a crisis on multiple fronts and alienated our allies, which you've now turned around and asked to come and get involved in trying to help us piece this back together.
Right.
So by any stretch of the imagination, you can't say that where we are today with Iran, vis-a-vis Iran, is anywhere safer. Now, imagine in a year or maybe 4 years, President Trump leaves office, and you're trying to get the Iranians to sit down across the table from you and say, no, this time when we sign a piece of paper, we actually mean it. Why would anyone in the world who's watching this president sign a piece of paper that says America's committed to a certain plan abide by it, or believe that they will abide by it?
Interesting thing, though, Ali Arouzi, if you're still there, yesterday I was talking to Ernest Moniz, the Energy Secretary who helped negotiate this under
sensors. Stop the chair if there are obstacles.
You're kidding me.
You better up your game.
female uranium and the development of a nuclear weapon, something that Iran said it's never been in pursuit of, but evidence seemed to suggest otherwise. There was always a hope that that deal would bring Iran into the international fold, back into the global economy, and make them a better neighbor. And the criticisms of the deal right from the beginning were that it didn't control Iran's use of proxies in the region, including the stuff that Qasem Soleimani was already well known for. Again, Donald Trump said that today, that Iran must stop that action. Is it likely? Is there any potential deal? Is there anything the West can offer Iran that will cause it to stop sponsoring the activity that it sponsors in Lebanon, in Gaza, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, and in other places?
It's highly unlikely, Ali. They are very dependent on these proxies that they have in these regions. That has given Iran a lot of power here. It's allowed them to threaten America indirectly throughout this entire region. Those proxies are spread all over here. And Iran is supremely paranoid about America, and they use these proxies as a defense shield against them and as a threat in times like this. But having said that, if the deal was working, if there was a ton of foreign investment pouring into Iran, it might have softened all of those things. You know, at the end of the day, when a country's economy is booming, everybody is making money, you have to worry less about your adversaries because you're doing business with them, you're making money with them. But that never ever developed. You never really saw the fruits of the nuclear deal. I mean, there was maybe one good year after the deal was signed. People were exploring the field to see what they could do in Iran, but no real investment was made here. So we'll never know what the results of that would have been. But as it stands today, Iran's proxies are growing, they're getting more powerful, and there's absolutely no chance of the Iranians returning to the negotiating table over the nuclear issue with the United States. The Supreme Leader has been very clear about that. Even this morning in the speech he made, he said, you know, negotiating with America would be a foolish thing to do. They've shown how dishonest they are. So Iran has taken a completely new strategy, and you see all the folks that negotiated the nuclear deal are not particularly powerful in this country anymore.
Ali Arouzi, I don't know when you sleep or if you sleep, because every time I come on TV, I'm having a discussion with you. Thank you for yeoman's work there. Ali is our man in Tehran. Ayman Mohyeddin, same thing actually for you. I don't know when you sleep either, but we're grateful that you are here to provide us with analysis. Coming up, what damage could Iran do if the situation does escalate? We're going to break down Iran's military capabilities and see how it compares.
But time's running out. Enter at PCH.com before it's too late. Real people.
That was last night. Thankfully, no Americans were hurt or killed in the strikes, no Iraqis either, according to U.S. officials. And the Trump administration believes that may have actually been by design, a way for Iran to show strength and capabilities without escalating tensions any further. CNN senior Washington correspondent Jeff Seleny is live for us on Capitol Hill. Jeff, tell us how lawmakers are responding to this strike from Iran.
Well, Brianna, as House members are going in for that classified briefing right now to learn what happened in the wake of the first attack last week, Democrats are asking some of the same questions. They are curious to know from this administration what the imminent attack was, what led to the assassination in some of their descriptions, but certainly not the administration's descriptions, of the top military commander in Iran. But certainly, some mixed response to the president's remarks this morning from the White House. Democrats that we've been speaking to certainly are relieved that there was no more escalation in the moment, but others are saying, look, it is still a risky move. But no question, Republicans, including Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell and other Senate Republicans we've spoken to who talked to the president last night, they are praising his response. Take a listen to what Senator McConnell said earlier.
I spoke to the president last night. I'm grateful for his patience and prudence as he and his cabinet deliberate how to respond appropriately to the latest Iranian provocation. As a superpower, we have the capacity to exercise restraint and to respond at a time and place of our choosing.
So many questions here. Still, what led to the initial attack last week? There'll be a Senate briefing this afternoon here as well, Brianna. Several presidential candidates are back here on Capitol Hill to learn more about that. No question, this has awakened the foreign policy debate here, with the results so far somewhat predictable here. But there is a measure of gratitude all around that there was no escalation, at least so far, from President Trump. Brianna?
Jeff Seleny live from Capitol Hill, thank you. And after administration officials finish that briefing for the House of Representatives, they will then brief the Senate next hour, here in about a little over an hour from now. And I'm joined now by Senator Tim Kaine of Virginia. He will be in that briefing. He serves on both the Armed Services and Foreign Relations Committees. Senator, thank you so much for joining us at this key time. And let us know what you are hoping to learn in this briefing.
Brianna, this will be the first opportunity for senators to understand was there in fact an imminent threat that led to the strike of General Soleimani and an Iraqi governmental official struck and killed in Iraq over the objections of the Iraqi government. And so we'll be digging into what was the evidence of imminent threat. We also are going to be digging into the second question, which is, since Iraq had objected to the United States taking these strikes on Iraqi soil, they don't want Iraq to be the Colosseum where the U.S. and Iran battle each other. What is the follow-on consequence? The Iraqi parliament has voted to expel American troops. Will American troops leave? If that happens, a predictable effect would be to embolden Iran and embolden ISIS, could make the regions less safe, could be counterproductive. And so we're going to be digging into that question as well.
Has Iran already become the Colosseum where this is playing out?
In an odd way, you're right. What Iraq wants is the ability to, be stable in its own country. It doesn't want to be the avenue of a geopolitical war between the United States and Iran. And you've seen in recent weeks, just basically since Christmas, an Iranian militia, an Iraqi militia connected to Iran, striking an Iraqi base, killing an American contractor. Then you saw the U.S. take military action against multiple sites in both Iraq and Syria, killing 24 Iranians. Then you saw Iran participating and encouraging the protests at the American embassy in Baghdad, and then the strike of Soleimani, and then the Iranian response last night. My point to my colleagues is this: the framers of our Constitution understood war and they understood escalation. And they believed the antidote to escalation is deliberation by Congress. And that's why on Friday the 3rd, I introduced a resolution that will get a privileged place on the Senate floor where I can compel a vote about the question of whether the president should be able to wage war on his own or whether he should have to come to Congress if he wants to wage war against Iran.
Were you encouraged by what the president said in his address, by his not ratcheting up the rhetoric further towards military counter-retaliation, and do you think these sanctions that he's putting on Iran are appropriate?
There were aspects of the speech that I thought were just falsehoods, but as a general matter, the tone of both the Iranian response last night and the way the U.S. Military is viewing that response and the president's language this morning suggests some prudence and some desire by the U.S. and Iran to focus on de-escalating. And I think Congress can play an important role in that. So the takeaway, my main takeaway from the speech is it seems like on both sides, because the U.S. and Iran have been engaged in hostilities against each other for the last 18 months or so, and now inflicting battlefield casualties one against the other, it seems like there maybe is a step back from that, and that's a positive. We need to do what we can to bring about a de-escalation rather than a foolish rush to another war.
You mentioned falsehoods. I suspect one of the ones you're talking about is the president's claims that money released by the Obama administration as part of the Iran deal actually paid for the missiles that Iran used against U.S. military targets last night. Is that true?
The president has often said the U.S. gave money to Iran. That's not what the deal did. In fact, the president has never shown that he understands anything about the deal. There was money that was Iran's money that had been frozen that was released, but that's not the U.S. giving Iran money when it was their own money. Another thing the president said, the opening line, Iran will never get a nuclear weapon as long as I'm president. The Iran nuclear deal in the first paragraph on the first page said Iran will never seek to purchase, acquire, or develop nuclear weapons. So we had them agreeing forever that they'd never get weapons, and now President Trump is just saying they're not going to get weapons for the next year and a half. No, if we had stayed in the deal, we had enforceable action against Iran that they would never get weapons. The president, by blowing up diplomacy, has led to great chaos in the region, and that's why we're at the brink of potential war right now.
Do you think, and at this moment I think it does feel like there's an exhale, including coming from Capitol Hill, that we are where we are, but do you think this is the end of Iranian retaliation for the killing of Soleimani, or do you expect that farther out we're going to see perhaps engagement change or there to be other ramifications from the targeted killing?
Very hard to predict, but I do not believe this is the end of escalation activities conducted by both the U.S. and by Iran. Remember, we were within seconds of a U.S. airstrike against Iran in June that the president called off at the last minute, and then there was a little bit of a de-escalation, but we were back with both Iran and the United States doing military attacks on the other and inflicting casualties within the last 2 weeks. We would be foolish to think that this moment of exhaling is a permanent state. I think the only way we will provide some permanence is if Congress reasserts the notion that we're not going to war without a vote of Congress. And the resolution that I have basically says the president can't take us to war on his own. We can always defend ourselves against imminent attack. But other than that, if we're to be at war with Iran or anyone, it should have to be based on a debate and vote in Congress. That's what's fair to our troops. It's not to send them into harm's way to risk their life and their health and see bad things happen to their friends based on the say-so of one person, this president or any person. It's only supposed to happen if Congress has a debate and says this is in the national interest.
Senator